How old would you be if you didn't know how old you was? Age is just a question of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. Folks, those are two very famous quotes from none other than Leroy Satchel Paige. A man who was 42 years of age before he was ever able to throw a pitch in Major League Baseball because of the color of his skin. A man who we will never know the true story of how old he was, how many wins he had, losses, etc., etc. But we had the chance to be around Mr. Paige a number of times. And just recently, I was asked during a speaking engagement who my most favorite person was or who I admired the most. And the man that came into my mind immediately is not a man that had just impressed me so much, but also made an impression on the world. You see, folks, no one broke down the barriers of segregation for decades before Jackie Robinson ever showed up, other than Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige also was a huge proponent of civil rights and did more for our country than anybody that comes into my mind. His legend is a legend, and no one really knows his age for sure. In fact, baseball a few years ago set out to find out just how old Satchel Paige was. And they did locate his mother, Mrs. Paige, down in South Mobile, Alabama. Satch's mom listened intently to the questions, and her answer was, when asked how old Satchel was, I can't remember if he was my first child or my 14th. But I do know that we had hid his birth certificate in my Bible years ago, only to find out, though, that the goat, our family goat, had eaten the Bible. Obviously, Satchel had gotten to his mom before they did. Think about that. She didn't know her son's age, but she knows that the goat lived to be 27 years.
So I will say this again. I am the proudest man on earth right today, and I know my wife is, and my sister, and my sister-in-law, and everybody.
Such is what legends are made of. How did Satch get his nickname? Even that is shrouded in a little bit of mystery, but the common story is that Satch was working as a porter in one of the local hotels, and he saw quickly that he could make more money by carrying more bags at one time up to the guests' rooms. So Satchel concocted is a better word, a contraption that had a pole and rope together, where Satchel was able to put 4 bags on the pole, and one of his fellow porters said, "Hey, you look like a walking satchel tree," is the quote. So it stuck. That moniker just stuck. So forever he was known as Satch. Satch got into trouble with the law, and not bad, but it was some larceny and some truancy, and was sent to a reform school. And Satch spent 5 years at that reform school, but Satch would tell you that it was probably the best years of his life because he met Reverend Moses Davis at that point in time, who became his baseball coach. And Moses Davis taught Satch to kick his front foot, his left foot up high when pitching, but also to move his glove over that would be directly behind his arm and in the batter's face, therefore distorting the batter's view a little more and confusing him. And Satch gives Reverend Davis all the credit for his success. A little known fact is that Satch got out of the reform school 6 months before he turned 18. Now, had he turned 18, we would never have heard of Satchel Paige because those infractions would have landed him in jail. So again, another part of the Satchel Paige mystique. So now Satchel goes out on the road at 18 years old and starts barnstorming the country and playing in anywhere there was a ballpark. The Caribbean, South America, the United States, a different city, a different town, against a different team every single day. Now, records weren't kept back then in those days, but Satch kept his own records, and by his own account, he had pitched in 2,500 games, winning 2,000 of them. He threw 50 no-hitters and at least 250 shutouts. And I do know that a record that I do believe is that he pitched 62 consecutive scoreless innings. Now, that's an impressive record, but yet this man wasn't doing this in the major leagues. Years have passed, and as I said, at 42 years of age, Satch did get his chance to pitch in the big leagues, and he pitched with the Cleveland Indians and the St. Louis Browns. Now, how did we get to know Satch? Well, in 1977, there was a league meeting called in Springfield, Illinois, where the general managers were all invited to attend a meeting, and we were also promised a dinner afterwards with a celebrity guest. We had the league meeting, and then we were ushered into another room where the celebrity guest was none other than Satchel Paige. And as luck would have it, or fate, my father was seated right across from Satchel, and I'm next to my father, and we just have, frontal view of each other. And folks, these two guys just hit it off. I mean, it was like Abbott and Costello, peaches and cream, peanut butter and jelly. They just clicked. It was so wonderful to watch, because here's the greatest probably storyteller of all time, Satchel Paige, talking to my dad, who might have been one of the best baseball historians of the time, and just story after story after story, and our salad hadn't even come yet. So once we got through the meal, this banter continued back and forth, and now all the help in the hotel was surrounding us, and the more the better, because Satchel could spin yarn after yarn after yarn about his days in the Negro Leagues, and he would talk about players like Josh Gibson and Buck O'Neill and Cool Papa Bell and Buck Leonard. You just couldn't put a price tag on that to hear all these stories. So during that conversation with Satch, though, I also noticed that Satch and my father had another commonality. They both liked the John Barleycorn. John Barleycorn refers to alcohol, and specifically in this case, whiskey. Now, Jim, my dad, liked a little splash of water with his whiskey. Satch would only drink the whiskey with sweets, which meant 7-Up. So knowing that, good intel, we also picked up on the fact that Satch was probably not doing very well financially. He kind of needed some money, and he proffered the idea of coming to Denver and making a public speaking appearance, or take him around to different radio stations and TV stations to, do some public relations work for us. But I then asked Satch, what would you like to do if we were to do this? And Satch says, well, he says, my arm's still pretty good. He said, why don't we get the media to come out and have them face old Satch and see if they can hit a ball off of me? And I said, will you do that? And he said, arm's still good, Bob. Then the best idea was, he said, then you give him a certificate that says, I got a hit off Satchel Paige, or I batted against Satchel Paige. Brilliant. And that's exactly what we did. We leave Springfield, Illinois. We assigned Satch to a contract. The day is August 22, 1977, is a day that Satch will pitch batting practice. But in the meantime, we had contacted all of the Denver media and all the disc jockeys, all the news, weather, and sports people. Everyone was in on it, and it took on a life of its own, because they began to banter back and forth with each other as to who's going to get the longest hit or the best base hit against Satchel Paige. Folks, you cannot buy that kind of publicity. Now, the day comes. We go to Stapleton International Airport, and because Satch just had carry-on luggage, Satch met us at the curb, and my dad immediately gets out of the driver's seat, throws the keys to me, opens the door for Satch, puts his bag in the trunk, and says, Bob, you're driving. I want to spend time with the man. And this is apologies to Carrie Underwood for her great song, Jesus Take the Wheel. But this was my Jesus Take the Wheel moment, because now that means I'm in charge of arguably the greatest living Hall of Fame player there was, and maybe the best in all of Negro League history. But that's okay, because the conversation is so good immediately. And as we leave Stapleton Airport, I'm making a right turn on Quebec Street, which will take us to I-70 and then onto the ballpark. But Satch says, no, make a left turn and go down to 32nd Street, which I did. Well, 32nd Street now is called Martin Luther King Boulevard. And as we're driving down Martin Luther King Boulevard, Satch is pointing out different areas of the neighborhoods that he remembers. But this also leads into an area called 5 Points. It's where 5 streets come together. In its day was a heyday. It was a jiving place. It was full of great jazz musicians like Count Basie and Billie Holiday and Dizzy Gillespie and many, many more. And Satch, of course, was pitching during that era too, and attending a lot of those functions, because the Denver Post had a Negro Leagues tournament there. So then Satch says to me, he called me Junior, I think, pull over to the right. We do, and we stop in front of a gun shop. At this point in 1977, 5 Points is a very run-down area, very decimated, very, very bad, sketchy area. And now Satch is going to get out of the car and go into a gun shop. Now, my father and I looked at each other saying, what is going on here? What happened was that Satch got out of the car, told us to stay there. He went in 10, 12 minutes later, came back out, totally mystified that the people in the gun shop knew him right away. It was also a shoe shine parlor, and one old boy never looked up, Satch said. He just, "Hey, Satch, how you doing?" Just knew my voice. And my father said, "Satch, don't you get it? To them, you're their hero. You're their Abraham Lincoln. I mean, you are everything to them." Now we get back in the car, and now we get out of that neighborhood, and we get to the stadium, and we get Satch down to the clubhouse, and we make sure he gets a Denver Bears uniform on and a hat and a glove and all that. We go to our offices. Satch was supposed to appear at 5 o'clock, and it's now about 2 o'clock, 2, maybe 3. We go back down to see it, make sure everything's going well, and there's already a crowd of media on the field wanting to see Satch. And of course, he comes out in the Denver Bear uniform, and he immediately just starts signing autographs like it was no tomorrow. Satch did see my dad, and Satch was not good at names, but he saw my father from afar, and he said, "Hey, Jim, you got the sweets?" Which meant he knew that Jim had the whiskey, but he wanted to make sure he had the sweets. And of course we did. Anyway, Satch pitched batting practice to the media. He just wowed them. We had 9,000 or 10,000 people there to see it on a Tuesday night when we normally have 1,500 to 2,000. So the brilliant man came up with a brilliant promotional idea, and it just worked. Satch then was ushered up to the radio box and said to me, he said, "I want to see if these guys would like for me to do a little play-by-play." And I thought it was a great idea, not knowing if they'd do it or not. But Mark Holtz and Joe Cullinane were our broadcasters, and they welcomed him in. And I have the tape right here, the transcript of those 3 innings that Satchel Paige did with those broadcasters, and it was just phenomenal. I don't believe this transcript is anywhere in the world but right here. So take a listen with me, will you?
How would you picture the ballpark like this? They say you got to keep it down because if it's up with a light air, it would go. Would you do anything different in this ballpark if you were pitching today?
Well, the most of the time we was learning to pitch with the flag. Now, see, the flag is blowing to left. Well, see, we try to switch. We had a lot of men that had number 1 control. You would have to try to hit the ball to right field, because see, if you get up on it now, you'd hit the left field, you'd hit the sand. But nowadays, the guys, a lot of them, they just don't wait for that control like some of the pitchers had back in those days. And that's what makes it.
If you were a general manager or manager today and you got an expansion team, what would Satchel Paige start with? Would you try to get all pitchers if you had a draft, or do you try to get the balance?
Well, I would try to get the balance, if you want me to tell you the truth, because a lot of people think the starting pitcher wins a World Series, but the bullpen wins it. When you can pick 2 or 3 men and the bullpen can come in and throw strikes, because you can figure the starting pitcher, he's not going to go 9 all the time. Most of the times he don't go 9. Then you got something to work with from the bullpen. But everybody tries to get a 9, and then pitching, that's hard to do nowadays.
So I guess balance is the big key no matter how you look at it. All the good ball clubs really have some balance on it.
That's right. And then when you get your good combination like in infield or second baseman, you got something going.
After the 3rd inning, I grabbed Satch to take him to my father's office. And the first thing he said to me was, "Did you get the sweets?" And we did. So that night in my dad's office lasted with him and one other friend of ours, Kevin McNicholas, who's our concessionaire. That night lasted till the sun came up the next morning. None of us had a hangover because none of us ever went to sleep. But as long as the sweets were there and the whiskey was there, they just kept on talking. And it was a true highlight of my life to be able to be part of that. But Satchel Paige's charisma and his people skills were so great that he would know that I wasn't part of a lot of these conversations, and he'd bring me in. And one time he said, "Son, who invented night baseball?" And I said, "Well, I think the Kansas City Monarchs did." He said, "Oh no, we invented night baseball. Satchel Paige's All-Stars, whenever we played, when the sun went down, we moved our automobiles up to the fences and turned on the floodlights. We invented night baseball." Another question he asked me was, let's play the name game. Name me a city that I did not play in. And after 30 minutes of going through every city I can think of, from Podunk to Duluth, Satch had played everywhere. Anywhere there was a diamond, he was there. So I asked him, I said, "Well, Satch, a lot of times you would probably just find an old baseball field, and what would you do for bases?" He said, "Well, we had bases at first, but then we just decided to use potato sacks." And I said, "Okay, then what would you do for home plate?" And he said, "I took a Dixie cup, put it on the ground, squashed it, and I threw at that Dixie cup My control was so good that that's all I needed. Who am I to argue? There's a million stories about Satchel Paige, and he asked me if I knew any of his pitches. Yeah, Satch, a fastball, curveball, and I think you have a changeup. He says, I got a name for every one of my pitches. He said, my fastball is the midnight crawler. My curveball is the two-humper. My slider is the backdoor dodger. And all of them had names. And my changeup was the hesitation pitch, which, by the way, made Satch famous. Anyway, Satchel Paige, what a beauty. And I got a chance to be around him. And there are stories upon stories upon stories, but I can't leave without telling you about one more. In the 1942 season, Satchel Paige was playing for the Kansas City Monarchs and the greatest baseball hitter, Josh Gibson, and he played for the Washington Homestead Grays. Now, during the season, the Homestead Grays had beaten Satchel twice, and Satchel wanted a rematch. Well, as it turns out, Game 2 of the 1942 Negro World Series, Satchel Paige was brought in relief to protect a 2-run lead. Satch assessed the situation and saw that there was 1 out and a man on third base. And Gibson was scheduled to hit, but not for 3 more people. So Satch, after conferring with his manager, of course, walked the next 2 hitters. This is in the World Series, to get to Josh Gibson. And Satch said, Josh, I ain't gonna throw you no smoke at your yoke, but I'm gonna throw you some peas at your knees. And I don't know if anybody wants to guess what happens. It's kind of like, why would I watch the Titanic again? I know how it ends. 3 straight peas right at the knees, and Josh Gibson never got the bat off his shoulder. Folks, that's the legends of Satchel Paige. There's a number of renditions of that story, but Satch told that to me, and that's what I'm going with. On Memorial Day, just recently, I had a chance to visit Satchel Paige's grave. He and his wife, Lahoma, share kind of a shrine in Kansas City, and I was able to see it, and amazingly, there were some baseballs on the ledge, and there was some flowers, of course. What struck me the most was that Satch had on there a list of the rules to live by. My favorite one is number 6. It says, folks, don't look back. Somebody might be gaining on you. Folks, don't look back. Join me in looking forward to our next monthly podcast of the ultimate backstage pass to sports. Hi, this is Bob Burris, and thanks for watching. This is my 58th year in the business, behind the scenes of sports, and I also do public speaking appearances around the country as well. So this is my podcast, and hopefully you will like and subscribe. Hopefully tune in to our next monthly podcast. Thanks again.